Welcome to DevOps and Docker Talk. I'm your host, Bret Fisher. I create cloud-native DevOps content for YouTube, podcasts, and courses, and I hope you find it useful. This week, I'm with my co-host, Nirmal Mehta of AWS, and it's another AI episode, talking about running your own AI LLMs locally for development with Continue.dev. And we have their CTO here, Nate Sesti, on the show streaming from San Francisco to answer all our questions about how this works. You've probably heard about GitHub Copilot and other AI code assistants, and now the Continue team has created a completely open source solution as an alternative, or maybe a superset of these existing tools. Because along with it being open source, it's also very configurable and allows you to choose multiple models to help you with code completion and chatbots in VS Code, JetBrains, and more coming soon. So this show builds on our recent Ollama show, which Continue uses Ollama in the background to run a local LLM for you, if that's what you want to continue to do for you, rather than internet LLM models. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. We dig into all this with Nate, so let's just get to it. Nirmal and I came with dozens of questions we had about this interesting open source project, and we answer a ton of those along with live show questions from the audience in this episode. This is an edited version of our weekly YouTube live show that you can join and ask our guests questions on Thursdays at 1 p.m. US Eastern at Bret.live. So please enjoy this episode with Nate Sesti of Continue. Nate Sesti,
hello.
Here from Continue, the CTO. Hello.
Hey.
All right, Nate, can you introduce yourself? Who are you? Why are you on the show?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Nate. I'm the CTO of Continue. Got really into building iOS apps way back in the day, and that was kind of what got me hooked on programming. I was playing games on my phone by myself, and one day I'm like, can I build one on my own? Ended up studying physics in college, but working as the first engineer at a YC startup, and later at NASA JPL building mission control software, but kind of wound up starting Continue. It was originally a side project, and then just kind of took off from there.
Nice.
Awesome. Can you give us a little bit of a background of how Continue started? I believe you're the first employee. Give us a little bit of the history of what Continue is and how it got started.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was kind of born of actually, to be honest, a deep respect for GitHub Copilot. It was something that I was using for a handful of months for a time. And I realized after a while that it was changing how I write code. And it was a fantastic experience. At the same time, with any early tool like that, you come up with your laundry list of, well, I wish it did this, I wish it did that. At some point, we're just like, can we sit down and try and do better? And we had all these ideas, and in the beginning, it was just kind of very naively experimenting. And what are these large language models capable of? How much code can they write? Can they rewrite my entire code base in a different programming language? Well, maybe not, but they're really good at this or that. And so through a lot of experimentation, eventually realized others should be able to do that experimentation. So kind of the open source route is what kicked in. And I think that that's been kind of the hook that's been super important for us thus far.
Yeah. Now you and the team are with Y Combinator working hard on making this a business.
Exactly.
So you mentioned wanting to enable others to experiment and try out these tools to enhance their day-to-day productivity. What do you mean by that? What's the value that you're aiming for with these tools that you stumbled upon or created or experimented on?
Yeah. One of the first things that is honestly quite a lot of fun to play around with, but also useful, is just trying all of the different models. And I think we're at a place right now where it's almost every other day you'll see a new model drop. There's a lot of noise around them, but it can be fun if you're trying to keep up. But maybe even if not, I find every few months there's maybe a new king of the hill. And so it's useful to be able to kind of, with it all being so subjective, and it's like, how do you actually measure intelligence? It's kind of notoriously difficult. Being able to try out these things for yourself and really figure out what fits best into my workflow. Which of these large language models do I like the most?
Yeah, it's not like we have a clear winner yet or anything where we all obviously know about ChatGPT and that was sort of like the big hit, but even though this stuff has been around for a long time, but there's an increasing amount, even for someone that's in this bleeding edge sort of technology, it's actually pretty hard to keep up. At some point during the show, I'll have to say, well, what's your favorite model? What do you use day to day? You're the guy building these tools. What's your stack look like?
That is $1 million question. So most recently, I've been trying out GPT-4o, as probably that's how GPT-4o would pronounce it itself, to be honest, given the demos I've seen. I've been using that. I like the speed trade-off. So I've been using that for kind of my chat window type questions, like Google replacement. And then For tab autocomplete, more of the classical Copilot UI, I use StarCoder 2. Model released by Hugging Face, totally open source. Benefit being I can run it on my Mac, which is pretty cool. So I can shut off the Wi-Fi and it would continue working.
Yeah, and there's a lot of choice here, and it does feel a little overwhelming in terms of if I'm, the thing about Copilot is it removes choice, right? So if you're getting started, and that was probably my first IDE or editor add-on for AI was Copilot, and I think we actually tested it on this show when it was beta, showing off whether or not it was good for DevOps, whether it understood YAML well, and stuff like that. And obviously, that's changed a lot into just the last 2 or so years since it was in beta. I'm just curious, actually. We're going to get into a demo, by the way. We're going to get into some of the weeds. And if you're at all curious about this stuff, if you're new, or maybe you're using this stuff every day and you're actually curious about all the other options and alternatives, does Continue help me at all, like reduce choice and sort of give me sort of the golden path to some of these things? Or is it something where, because not that I'm shaming on open source tools, but a lot of times the challenge with open source tools is how do I connect all these things together, right? We've got something running locally, which I didn't normally have before. I've got something in my IDE that's providing me the sort of the interface to the AI backend. Is there like a happy path with this where it's easy to get started in 5 minutes?
Definitely is. I kind of believe in full control, but sensible defaults. Second you download Continue, you'll see a big screen. And the only question it's going to ask you is, do you want to be entirely local because of security, et cetera? Or do you want to use our cloud models? You click your button, done. We'll set you up with the best models for that scenario and everything will work. And then if you want to go customize later, you can do everything in a JSON file.
Nice.
I don't want to quickly go over that fact too quickly because I think that's super important. A lot of our audience, and I can speak for myself and the customers that I talk to, they're all trying to navigate the balance between wanting to use these tools and seeing the productivity gains that they could potentially achieve with using code generation tools and LLMs, but are also trying to navigate like their enterprise policy, their security policies, like what they're legally allowed to use, where they can use those tools. They probably have policies that like block even some of the most popular websites that provide those services because of unknown, like the origin of the code and the recommendations and what the training data was trained on. So
yeah,
licensing, et cetera. So I think that's a really good choice that you made, Nate, around giving that choice to the user to figure out, to ask them whether they want to run it locally or not, or take advantage of cloud models. Because I think we're still very early days where there's a large spectrum of options now, right? Where it could even be in the future where we have not local LLMs, but models that are private, your own private cloud-based models, right? Even so, like an in-between kind of state. And so providing that option and running things locally is super important. Have you seen that with the folks the customers that, potential customers that you've talked to, the users of Continue? Have you seen that resonates with them?
Yeah, to be honest, that's been a huge factor that we've seen. So I think kind of the first thing is like as an individual developer, use local mode, and that's huge. It's basically just permissionlessness. I don't have to ask my boss. It's all local. Nothing's going anywhere. And turn off my Wi-Fi and it works. It's proof. And the next step is we do see a lot of people, like a lot of these security conscious companies, or in cases where, the deal's not quite worked out, like what are we allowed to do or what are we not? You can host a model your own on your own VPC, on your own bare metal. So there's like a ton of options, and we've seen kind of everything across the board. And there's really just not like a one size fits all, but whatever it is, if you've got an endpoint, you can plug it into Continue.
Nice. So once you've made that choice, what does it look like? What's the next thing that you can start doing with Continue?
Yeah. Again, we got it here on screen. It's awesome. Like the two primary things I would say are GitHub style tab autocomplete. So you're going to be typing in your file, you're about to write the rest of the line, and then all of a sudden there it is in little gray ghost text, and you just press tab and it's done for you. And so that's kind of thing A. Thing B is this chat window we're seeing on the side, on like the right side of these GIFs. I won't pick a side right now.
Well, we'll have to ask the LLM how it's pronounced.
Yeah.
O.
Might have a totally new pronunciation for us, but yeah, this chat window is kind of does a handful of things, but it's really just like a general question answering engine. So quite often, you'll have a question that you would typically ask in Google and then go 3 threads deep and Stack Overflow on, or you just ask the LLM and it's been trained on those threads. So it can give you the answer pretty quickly. That, or you might highlight some code, be like, hey, I don't understand this code. A senior dev wrote this a while ago and doesn't want to explain to me what's going on. Or you might say, hey, can you write a unit test for this function? So all of that can happen in the sidebar.
Awesome. In terms of what's pulled in as context when you're using in both those modes, like how much does Continue provide the LLM in terms of context in your IDE?
Yep. So this is actually one of the huge things. This is basically what's going under the hood. So you've hit the nail on the head with this question. A lot of it is interestingly similar to what a human would do. You're in VS Code and maybe say you write the opening parenthesis to a function. You're about to write a function call, right? You probably want to see the definition of that function. And so maybe you'll command click and go to definition. And we can use that same exact thing with autocomplete and just say, these types, these variables, these functions, this class, it all looks important. Let's go command click, pull in the definition, bring that in as context. And, a lot of the time, that's exactly what the model needs to see. And from there, it's almost just pattern matching.
Is the full code base that you have opened up also provided as context, or is it a subset of what's showing up, or is it only the file that's open at that time?
Depending on the size of your code base. I mean, this is a recent development. We've got 1 million token context length models at this point, that's new. That's coming out. I mean, that's
for local. Let's just point out that's local. Is that local?
Depending on the size of your GPUs, basically.
Okay.
You could. And how long you're willing to wait. I think we'll get there. But yeah, depending on the size of your code base, you could fit the whole thing in context. You've got 2 million lines, maybe not. But at that point, quite often, you see 90% of the time, you're maybe asking a question about your currently open file. So we'll include that. We have a feature where you can press Command Enter. We'll use what's called RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation, as a way to kind of automatically select the most important files.
Okay.
And there's a whole science behind this. We'll check recently edited files. We'll use similarity search. We'll use kind of this command click thing that I described, all to kind of pull in all the things that we can guess are what you need to answer the question.
Got it. So because the balance between context size, literally the hardware, if it's locally, or even the cost associated with calling out to a cloud-based LLM, you have some kind of smarts, if you will, an algorithm that's deciding what the prioritization of the content that's open should be in the context for each query or each prompt that you're at. And is that part of what that sounds like to me one of the main value propositions when you get down to the details of something that Continue is providing, is helping decide same defaults around that? Or do I have to go in and tweak Continue to tell it what to do, or can it just kind of figure that out and the defaults are sane with respect to that?
Yeah, always same defaults. I think with this respect, no need to understand underlying science. We give people the knobs to turn, and we see at times they want to ramp it up and they're like, I've got my million contexts, let's fill it with examples of code. And sometimes they're like, well, let's leave it the default. But yeah, the same default sort of thing.
Awesome. Bret, should we get into are you interested in seeing what this looks like trying this out?
Yeah, let's do it.
There's so much new terminology around all these tools these days.
Yeah.
And just like the last show that we did with Olama around LLMs, while we were doing the show, Llama 3 model came out, and there's new paradigms like multimodality is increasing in interest, and is the new buzzword within the LLM sphere, especially with this past week with ChatGPT 4. I don't know. I don't know how to say it. We're gonna ask it later.
No, that's how you say it. That's how you did say it. So yeah, that's how you say it.
That is correct.
Omni, the ChatGPT 4 Omni. I can't do it. So the terminology is all new to both of, at least to me, and also changing. The definition of these things are also changing almost week to week, and it's very fuzzy at times. And so don't feel like you need to know, you're missing out. We're all learning this together for sure.
Right. I think that's a good distinction we might want to make here too, Nirmal, because you're bringing up a good point that we're actually talking about two sides of the coin here. And we kind of, as engineers, we're all kind of muddling it together. But there's actually, if you want to use I'm gonna tell me if I'm wrong, Nate, on this, but if you want to use something like Continue or Code Spaces, you're really a user. Like as a developer, I don't necessarily need to be writing LLM code or writing an app on top of some sort of AI code or ML ops stuff, like all the machine learning world. I can just write normal apps and use these as a consumer, which means I can avoid understanding the stack of how LLMs work or whether or not I'm using a RAG or whether or not it's local or remote. I can just act a little dumb and sit back and enjoy the benefits of an LLM. Mm-hmm. But then there's the world of, I want to write, a lot of engineers right now, especially in the big, the FANG companies, they're all learning how to write things on top of AI stacks. And so they do need to understand this stuff. And they may or may not even be using one as an editor, but they're writing applications to take advantage of this stuff. And I feel like there's things we need to know for both, but it's not always the same things. And so for those of you that are watching and you're more of a traditional developer, that includes me, that isn't necessarily writing my own apps on top of an AI prompting system, and I'm just really wanting to use it to benefit my existing apps. And as I write them in code, I can there's probably a small amount that I really need to learn. And it's really about what we're maybe going to jump into with Nate here in a demo, is about how to understand how to use the prompting system and the features. And even with just Copilot, I'm always trying to catch up with there was Copilot, and then in my VS Code, then there was Copilot Chat, and then there was the Copilot beta add-ons, and there was just even just the tooling for using it as a consumer. It was a lot. And then we can avoid, if we just want to learn about how to use it to benefit our workflow, we can avoid learning all the deep terminology. But of course, we're all curious engineers. So we then want to dive in, learn about, token limits and the infrastructure on the back end that has to run, and whether I'm using a vector graph or graph database or whatever, all these things that I pretend to know about. So I just want to give people sort of you don't have to know it all to see some of the benefits of it. Just like you don't have to know how ChatGPT works to understand and use ChatGPT. So let's do it. Let's get into it.
On that note, let's get into it. Why don't you go ahead and show us what you got, Nate?
We can see VSCode here.
Yeah.
Yep.
Fantastic. Cool. Start from the top, I guess. I've opened some little example IPy notebook, and let's say I want to write a little for loop. Start to type that, and bam, you can see we've got the ghost text that's coming from Continue. You can press tab, and there's the actual code. So this is kind of that original Copilot functionality. Maybe you try something over here. Got this Fibonacci function. See if it would get this right. Nice. So yeah, so you can see it just shows up right at your cursor. Go in slow-mo again.
It's going so fast, you have to actually slow down.
Yeah. We'll go slow motion this time, and here's one line.
Whoa.
Bam.
Gotta go slow motion, Brett.
Slow motion. And even go one bit at a time. There we go. Anyway, so this is that tab autocomplete kind of experience. So this is very much in flow. You don't have to break out into a separate window or anything. Really right there at your fingertips.
So this is an extension you're installing it to VS Code. You've got Continue installed on the laptop of some sort, I'm assuming.
Yep.
And so what you're showing, is this local? Are you using a local LLM? I think you mentioned CodeStar 2. Is that what it's calling to develop that ghost text?
Exactly, yeah. So I have Ollama, who y'all had on a couple episodes ago, running the background, and it's running a model entirely locally. It's on my MacBook. So again, could not now shut up Wi-Fi, everything would work normally. So no data goes anywhere. All your code is sent only over localhost to Ollama and right back to your editor. So everything's local first. And for that reason, also doesn't cost anything.
So is Ollama a dependency? Do you have to install Ollama? Do I have to install Ollama and configure it? Or is that packaged with Continue?
So we have you install it separately. It's kind of a part of same defaults is we'll walk you through. The second that you install Continue, you'll see a screen, actually sort of like this. Say, welcome to Continue. What do you want to use? And you click local. Well, then you bring you to a screen where it'll walk you through interactively and make sure that you're set up as you need to be with Ollama. And so pretty quick process, under a few minutes. basically, from start to finish. And then it'll be working and you'll be seeing tab autocomplete suggestions.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I'm noticing this stuff down at the bottom right. Like it looks like you're choosing a model down there and it's showing me indexing progress. I guess it's indexing the code and stuff in that project.
Yeah. So maybe we'll start with the choosing a model. So like kind of the first choice that you make when you download Continue is you can just use the ones that we've got that by default recommended, or you can choose anything you'd like. And so, I mean, there's a whole list of them here. Anything you could think of to use basically is in this list. We have a nice GUI to kind of select them. It tells you how to set up everything. But once you've added one, you can see in the drop down here. So here we've got GPT-4o Omni. I could select that. I could select Llama 3. And so anything you'd like, really easy to switch back and forth between them. Even with keyboard shortcuts, it's always necessary.
So I could switch back and forth while I'm in like between prompts?
Yep. So I could say like, hello, who are you? And see, Llama 3 should say, hey, I'm Llama. Now, if I go and I switch to GPT-4o, we'll see how it pronounces its name. Actually, just up arrow. Hello, who are you? No. Are you GPT? Yes. Okay, it is. Cool. So you can switch back and forth pretty quickly, which is really nice for experimenting. You know, maybe that's a contrived example, but if you're trying to write some real code, you know, you'll quickly learn like what each one is capable of. Also be kind of fun.
So I find interesting about this. One thing that's interesting about this is in your code gen on the left-hand side, that can be a different model than the chat that you have on the right-hand side of the window right now, correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. So you can use a LLM that's geared toward code gen for the code gen part, while also using a more general LLM or an LLM geared toward documentation and code generation on the chat window. Is that the idea here?
Yeah. Typically, so the code gen models, like for tab autocomplete, often surprisingly small. And so like the one I'm using here, I don't know that the number itself matters so much, but 3 billion parameters. It's small enough to fit within, you know, a few gigabytes. And, you know, some like GPT-4 is rumored to be something like trillions parameters. And so like there's this huge variation in size, but for different tasks, you know, like you don't need that 4 trillion or however many trillion parameter model. You can just use the one that's the right size and something that fits on a MacBook. And
that's really cool. That's really just awesome. I'm
just trying to think about like, is that a real app? It sounds really interesting, but is that a real application? Are you seeing scenarios where it's more efficient to run 2 different models based on your input?
Yeah, definitely. So the big distinction to understand is like we'll just call them like chat and autocomplete models. And I mean, like there are details about how they're trained and like what they're built for and the size. It kind of turns out like kind of over in the sidebar, like I might ask something like how to set up a Helm chart. And, you know, like this is the kind of thing that I might go on to Google to ask. You know, it's like there's probably going to be a really awesome article on how to do this. And so like there's a decent amount of knowledge there. The answer that's being spit out is like fairly sophisticated. It's showing me code blocks, like, walking me through all the steps. Like basically it's an article on demand, which is pretty cool. And so like intuitively, like this is a bit harder than I say, okay, like I have this Fibonacci function, let's figure out what goes after this point. And so here you want it to be snappy. You want it to be, you know, it's like firing off almost every keystroke. Small model, fast model. It's good at pattern matching. But over here, you kind of want that greater intelligence in a way, so to speak. And so that's kind of the main distinction is you'll have like an autocomplete model and a chat model.
Yeah. I'm just curious, how do I change the autocomplete model? Because I see that little drop down for the chat model. Is there a similar experience for the other?
Yeah, ready to open a can of worms. So same defaults as always. I'm now going to lift up the hood, and you can do this. You don't have to. Right. But if I click this little gear icon in the corner, we've got a lot of options here. You can see everything that's configured up. I'll delete that later. Ton of options, like everything in Continue can basically be customized. But right here is where I've set up with Ollama, my star coder 3 billion. It's my tab autocomplete model. And I could change this to anything I wanted. So plenty of options here. And if you don't see it in the list, anything else you can think of to run.
Yeah, nice. So by default, it's using the same engine in both, or what's the default?
Yeah, so if you choose local mode, we'll set you up with dark order 2, 3 billion like this. And Llama 3 is kind of one of the really good foundational small local models that people have success with.
Nice.
And so both on Ollama. And actually, this is a newer feature of Ollama, which is awesome and fantastic timing from them. You can run 2 models at once in parallel. So they now have really fantastic support for that. You no longer have to, previously there would be a case for, sometimes you have to load the model in and out of memory. If you want to switch to the other one, you have to go through that whole ceremony, and no longer is that necessary.
That is awesome. I mean, so this is bleeding edge kind of use cases for using these tools. My mind is going on all the use cases where you could have different models, and then directing in the future, it could be tab autocomplete. It could be, document generation, but we could have other use cases where maybe there's like a pair programming system as well that's running and doing both. And so do you see a place where there's multiple models running and it's covering a lot of different use cases all within the IDE?
Yeah, I definitely see that being a thing. I think we're already, I've listed the 2, and already there are really other models being used kind of behind the scenes. There's an embeddings model, which, without going too far into it, is like this RAG retrieval augmented generation thing that we've talked about. Or this, I guess the question I didn't quite answer was what's going on with this indexing down here. And this is just kind of a fancy way of saying, got this code base over here, and you might ask a question, and you might not want to manually copy in all of the files that are important for the language model to answer the question. And so we can do some work behind the scenes to figure out automatically what is the file you're talking about. And so kind of before we can do that retrieval process, we have to set up an index. And so a lot of this has been around forever, like typical search that you do with something like Algolia or Google search or et cetera. So that kind of thing. But then also using kind of newer AI adjacent techniques like embeddings models and similarity search.
Can you show us an example of asking those kind of questions?
Yeah, definitely. Let's see, I am in my Continue repo. Let's say, here do we use Code Lens? Code Lens is a little VS Code feature that lets you put buttons inside of files. So when we write our VS Code extension, we use this sometimes. Maybe I forgot where it was, or just like forgot all the places we use it. So I'm going to actually just press Command Enter, and then automatically it's going to figure out here's some files that were important. So here it uses Code Lens. Here, just a good example. Another example here. And yeah, you can see it went ahead and explained how these are used.
That's really cool. So in slow motion, essentially, there's another, because of that indexing that Continue did, there's a prioritization of the files that are pulled in within context. And then with that context, then that question is asked. And then it giving you a response back with an explanation of each usage of Code Lens in this example, what it means within that code snippet, and also showing you what context from the index it used to find that or where it showed up. Correct?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And kind of the name of the game with language models is like, if you don't tell them what you're talking about, they'll happily explain something to you, but it might not always be the right thing. This hallucination, They might make up something that doesn't exist. But the second that they have the actual information they need, they do a really, really good job of summarizing it, explaining it, kind of picking out what the important parts are to answer your question. And so I find that like, if you're able to give them the right information, really you'll get like pretty top-notch responses a lot of the time.
That's awesome. So just like human to human communication, context is key.
Yeah, I guess so. Not much has changed.
That's a product tagline right there, by the way. Context is key. We have actually a couple of questions. Which version of Llama 3 are you using? How much better and slower are the large parameter models?
It is a good question. I typically run Llama 3 8 billion. That will be our default for Continue. Reason being, on a MacBook or other laptop, it'll be faster. And even for some MacBooks, I believe the next one up is a 70 billion parameter model. Won't fit on all MacBooks. I would say if you're going local, unless you've got a GPU sitting next to your laptop, probably best to go with the 8 billion. And Meta's actually done a great job of training the model. There's an impressive amount of knowledge squeezed into those 8 billion parameters. And so you will actually get quite fantastic answers out of it.
Nice. I'm going to throw a question in here real quick. If you're someone who wants to use Continue, with the most advanced and fastest possible. What do you guys test different machines like Windows versus Mac and like older Mac versus, M1 versus M3? Do you kind of get a sense of where your customers are finding the advantage? So like if I was going to do this, I'm kind of in the market this year for a new machine. I want an M1 Mac. What's the best? Like, do you have a preferred, this is what you get the fastest Continue experience on?
Yeah, I mean, the more RAM, the better. And basically, that's how it goes. I'm excited for M4 to come out. I don't know what the price tag is going to look like.
Yeah. But, not cheaper than the new one. Not cheaper than the current ones.
Going to be, no. It'll probably be, but it'll be exciting to see just how large a language model you can actually run. Okay.
So yeah, like if I'm buying a new MacBook this year and I normally buy like a 32 gig one. This is honestly just a little tangent, but I feel like, us developers normally, especially if you have a job, you maybe get a laptop if you're lucky every 2 years, if you're not lucky every 4 or 5 years. And so we all used to think of, over the last decade or more, we've thought of our local machine as, I need to be able to run VMs in it. I need to, I need something that has lots of RAM and CPU, but I would never buy over like a 32 gig RAM MacBook because I just didn't see the point. Like I never would have that many VMs running. So is there a scenario nowadays where like, not only do I want the fastest CPU with the most GPUs in it or whatnot, but like I would want maybe 64 gig because Ollama is running these giant models in the background and I couldn't run that maybe on a 32 gig machine? I don't have enough experience testing this stuff to actually know the difference.
Yeah. My MacBook is a 32 gig and I'm able to run Llama 3 8 billion for chat and the StarCoder 3 billion for autocomplete at the same time and really like without problem. So yeah, it is a good point to make is like, you don't need the biggest DPS machine. And to be honest, we'll see if the trends with the models as they get smaller or if they continue to grow.
That's a good point. Do they get smaller or bigger? Do they have less requirements or more requirements? Yeah. Because most people don't have 32 gig of RAM, much less 64 gig of RAM in their machine. So
yeah, I mean, this is a really good topic. And Bret, maybe we should probably do like a newsletter post around this.
Prepare for the future, buy more RAM.
I have another take, which is get as much as you can, as much RAM, because I think, I mean, we just were talking about how many of these models are coming out every week at this point. Mm-hmm. So it's very hard. Like, I don't think any three of us can tell anyone with any real knowledge a year from now what, maybe we need like 128 gigs of RAM because we're running like 100 different models that are fine-tuned for very
settle down.
No worries. No, my point is it's hard for us to predict what use cases are in the future. Buy as much RAM as possible.
Okay. Good point. If you can afford it, go for it.
Yes.
I highly recommend picking one up. Can I somehow compare what Continue would suggest versus what Copilot would suggest? Or could I have two VS windows open, one running Continue, one running Copilot on the same file? What would you do? I'm assuming Nate tests, like he compares. So
yeah. I've never actually done like a simultaneous comparison. So use it for a day, use the other for a day, and zoom out kind of big picture.
Okay.
You could download both extensions. They will coexist with each other happily. They won't kick each other out. And yeah, I think that is definitely a thing you could do is open them in different windows, same file. Might need to like toggle one off and toggle the other on, but definitely a good idea to kind of benchmark.
Like your code's in the middle, chat windows on both sides, have the chat bots competing, and then they're both trying to overwrite your autocomplete constantly, so you never really know which one is answering the autocomplete. Sounds great. Sounds like a great plan.
It seems like that might be something as a feature of VS Code to be able to choose per window, like the autocomplete, like functionality, like who has ownership of autocomplete. Otherwise, I could see both autocomplete bots like competing like character by character as it's trying to complete.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's great. This is a great experiment that we should all try.
Yeah, absolutely. We should totally. Well, the nice thing is Copilot's not affecting my local resources as much. So it's not like I'm running two competing products locally on my CPU. But yeah, that I would assume actually that you would have had to, I actually don't have no idea on the answer, but like I would assume that you'd run like VS Code Edge or whatever the beta version of it is. And so you'd actually have two different installs so that they wouldn't compete. But hey, run them both, see what happens. Let us know.
Really good question.
All right, Nate, what else should we know about Continue? Oh, any plan for Emacs? Are you trolling or are you a real Emacs fan?
We will get there. We've had people ask that, and I'm excited to do it. Kind of a discipline thing at this point. Want to knock the VS Code experience and JetBrains experience out of the park, but
yeah.
I promise we'll get there eventually, and I can't wait for it.
Yeah, there's lots. I mean, you're going to get Zed, you're going to get Sublime Text. Like before you know, you're going to have 30 editors you're going to have to add plugins to. But I mean,
and a Chrome extension and the whole everything, anything you can imagine.
Yeah, I want VS Code. Can I run the VS Code browser locally on this? I guess. Yeah. Because it's using like an Olama local port, right? So I technically could get there from the browser. Have you tried that? Have you tried that running the VS Code browser locally?
It does in fact work. Yeah, we've had people use it on everything from GitHub Codespaces to something like Gitpod to Coder, remote SSH, everything in between.
Nice. We had Gitpod awesome. On the show about a year ago when they launched. So for those of you that want to see about Gitpod, look back on our YouTube channel. All right, what did we miss, Nate? What did we miss on like advantages of Continue?
Yeah, I think we've been over the local thing, local first, huge deal. If you want it to not cost you so much, if you want to be able to use it in maybe security conscious environments, kind of a permissionlessness aspect to that. And then maybe one thing I would add, and I think we've seen like the tip of the iceberg here, but really like the depth of customizability is, I think, something that separates Continue, but more so even is just going to be a huge trend. I mean, maybe the simplest example, and I won't try and coin a term, but I feel like I've heard someone else say prompt as code. So kind of this idea that, maybe I'm talking to the language model for a while and I find out at one point that it's really good at writing unit tests. And so I play around a bit and I realize, okay, if I ask it explicitly, like cover edge cases, use this testing framework, consider this and that it always gives me a really great output and is very specific to me, my company, and everything else. And so I might say, hey, I want to save that prompt for later usage, and maybe I want to share it with a colleague or a friend. And so what you might do is we'll share more of this actually later this week. I'm coming out with kind of a new file format or an experiment with one called a prompt file, where you can save this and version control it right in your repo. So anyone that is on your team will be able to, assuming they've cloned the repo, Continue will pick it off automatically. And you could say like /test, and you wouldn't have to rewrite the whole prompt, all of this hard work that someone's done to figure out what is the best way to tell the language model to do this task. It's now repeatable. And I think there's just like a whole can of worms there. I think it may get to the point where it's like these tools help us, amplify us to do more of our jobs more quickly. I think a lot of the job might become actually in part writing these prompts and kind of building the tool that builds the tool. You even say that's the job of programmer is automating yourself. The second I'm repeating myself in code, I write a function to do it again. So like it's just a level above that, really.
Yep.
If you're a developer for more than 5 days, you eventually start writing your own tooling. So it's just I think it's a natural progression. If you're an audio enthusiast, eventually you want to build your own car. So there's a lot to unpack here. Honestly, we could talk for another hour, I feel like, on like the tips. Like I have tips around, like I always ask the model, hey, what are 5 things that I could do to make this code leaner or more secure? And I love asking it like recommendations for improvement, because it doesn't always prompt you. There's actually like CI tools that will scan your code and give you recommendations, but I like to do that in the editor. So I have found that LLMs actually really help me sort of improve my coding ability, not just through the code completion, but actually asking the model, because a lot of times you have existing code that you need to tighten up or make better. That's some great grammar right there. But we're gonna have to end it because we just don't have enough time left, and we're gonna have to have Nate back on the show when there's new stuff. But there's so much new stuff right now. If I had you in a year, it would probably be a completely different conversation. I mean, I'm just really glad that you're here, and I think we're all super curious on this stuff. It's the kind of stuff that I go to sleep at night thinking about, like what next tool do I need to figure out? What other new thing do I need to try out? And I can't keep up, and I'm someone who's trying to teach this stuff for a living. So I feel sorry for everyone out there that's just trying to they have a full-time job and they're also trying to learn all this stuff at the same time. It's just a lot. So where can we find more about Continue? Like there's Continue.dev is the website. Are we on TikTok? Like, are you on Reels? Like what's happening here? Where can I go learn? YouTube channel?
We don't have a TikTok presence yet, but we have our Twitter is Continue.dev. We're on LinkedIn, and on GitHub is github.com/continue.dev/continue, where if you want to dive into the source code or just kind of see at a high glance what it looks like, that's the place to go.
I do see that you have a Discord.
We do. How did I miss that? Discord is the place to be. That's the first thing I should have said. Yep. there's lots of good conversation happening there, and I'll be there basically 24/7. So kind of where I live is the screen that's always open on my computer. So if anyone has questions, happy to field them.
Well, we had definitely had some questions that we didn't even get a chance to get to. So head over to the Discord and chat with Nate there. And also, while you're at Discord, right above Bret's head is our Discord channel. So we invite you, Nate, to come join our Discord as well. And I'm sure you can, there'll be lots of community members asking questions about LLMs, what models to pick, and how to use your awesome tool. So thank you so much for being on the show today. And we will save up, Bret and I will save up so that we can upgrade our RAM so we can be prepared for you to be on the show again.
It's a 30 billion parameter model. That's what I'm going for.
There we go.
Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.